My daughter looked me dead in the eye at my own kitchen table and said, "You're not his father, Dad. You're just the babysitter he got stuck with when his real parents fell apart." Nobody moved. The refrigerator kept humming behind her like it hadn't heard a thing. My fork stayed halfway to my plate, frozen there, and across the table my grandson stopped chewing entirely, eyes down, like he'd learned a long time ago that the safest place during a storm was the inside of his own head. I set the fork down slow, the way you set down anything you don't trust yourself to be holding anymore. She smiled a little after she said it, the kind of smile people give you when they've been waiting a long time to say something out loud, and it finally came out exactly the way they'd rehearsed it in the shower. That's the part I couldn't shake later, not the words. The rehearsal underneath them. Some men get put out to pasture, quiet, forgotten, a tool left in a drawer nobody opens anymore. I didn't know yet that my daughter had already started measuring me for that drawer. Welcome back. Grab your coffee. Get comfortable, because in these stories the people who count you out are always the ones who forget to check if you're still standing. Subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. My name is Walter Hendricks. Everybody's called me Walt since basic training, 1983, and I never saw a reason to correct them. 63 years old, 31 years in the United States Army, most of it in an EOD unit, explosive ordnance disposal, the guys who get called when something's ticking and everybody else has already left the building. Retired a command sergeant major. Now I run a small locksmith and home security business 2 blocks off, Main Street, Hendricks Lock and Security. Been open 11 years. Widower 3 years now. 1 daughter, Denise. 1 grandson, Mason, 9 years old, living with me full-time since his mother's life got too unsteady to hold a 9-year-old inside it. That's the whole picture. Size down. I didn't know it yet, but that dinner table insult was the last easy night I'd have for a long time. 2 weeks after that dinner, I was 2 hours north at a lake cabin with 3 men I'd trust with anything I have left to trust anyone with. Doc Alvarez, who patched half our unit back together over the years and now runs the ER at Fort Bragg's Civilian Hospital Annex, and Ray Delgado, who used to run our convoy security and now wears a sheriff's deputy badge 2 counties over. Once a year, the 3 of us and whoever else can make it drive up to Doc's cabin, drink bad coffee, and lie to each other about how good our knees still are. Mason was home. A sitter named Priya, 19. A nursing student Denise had arranged through some app I'd never used and didn't love, but Mason liked her fine, and it was one night. My phone buzzed at 9:47 p.m. I remember the time exactly because I'd just set it face down on the picnic table to keep from checking scores. I flipped it back over out of habit. The same habit that's kept me alive more than once. You don't ignore a signal just because you're off the clock. It was Mason. "Don't come home, Grandpa. Please, something's wrong." I stared at those 6 words the way you stare at a wire you don't recognize on a device you do. Doc noticed my face change before I said a word. "Walt?" I didn't answer him yet. I called Mason. It rang twice and went to voicemail. I texted back, "What's wrong? Where are you? Is Priya there?" And watched 3 dots appear, disappear, appear again, the way a kid types when his hands are shaking. "I'm at Mrs. Okafor's next door." I climbed out my window. I heard Mommy on the phone with a man saying the house has to look like an accident and nobody has to know she was even here tonight. She said Grandpa's truck GPS says 2 hours out. We have time. I didn't know it yet. But that single sentence, she said nobody has to know she was even here tonight, was the exact moment the last soft part of me toward my daughter closed like a door with a deadbolt behind it. I'd spent 31 years reading rooms full of things built specifically to kill the people standing in them. You learn a rhythm to danger, a shape it takes before it announces itself. That text had the shape. Is this real? I remember thinking, some old animal part of my brain still trying to talk me down. Is my own daughter capable of this, or is a 9-year-old's imagination running wild on a dark night with a sitter he barely knows downstairs? And underneath both of those, if this is real, how long has it been coming, and how much of it did I already see and refuse to look at directly? I didn't wait for the third question to answer itself. I pulled up the security app on my phone, my own system, 4 cameras I'd installed myself around my own house, the same way I'd wire a client's property, driveway, back porch, side gate, garage, and thumb to the live feed while Ray was already standing up from the picnic table asking what I needed. The driveway camera showed nothing. The back porch camera showed nothing. The side gate camera showed a man I didn't recognize, mid-30s, ball cap pulled low, standing at my fence line with a red plastic gas container in one hand and a phone lit up in the other, clearly reading a text off the screen before he moved. Behind him, a second man, heavier, hood up, crouched near my garage door working at the lock with something small and metal. Doc. My voice came out flatter than I expected. The same flat I used to hear in my own voice standing over a device with 60 seconds left on somebody else's clock. Somebody's at my house with a gas can, and my grandson just climbed out a window to get away from it. I want to tell you I panicked. I've earned enough years and enough gray hair that I could tell you that, and you'd believe me, and nobody would think less of me for it. But the truth is, 31 years of training doesn't turn off just because the emergency finally shows up on your own porch instead of somebody else's. Some part of me had been training for this exact moment my whole career without knowing it. You clear a room before you trust it's empty. I'd said that sentence to Green privates 100 times over the years, teaching them not to walk into a space just because it looked quiet. I said it now out loud, to myself. Standing at a picnic table 2 hours from my own front door, Ray already had his phone in his hand. I'm calling the county line direct, not 911 dispatch. We'll get faster eyes that way. I still know half that shift personally. Doc was already grabbing his keys. We're 2 hours out driving legal. There's a medevac strip 40 minutes from here. I've got clearance to request a courtesy lift from, it's not protocol for a civilian call, but I'll make it protocol. I called Mrs. Okafor's landline next, because Mason's cell was clearly not a reliable channel anymore with his hands shaking that bad, and I needed a grown adult's ears on the line. Walt, he's here, he's safe. He's shaking like a leaf, but he's safe. I've already got my door locked, and I called it in myself the second he knocked. Bless that woman. 68 years old, lived next to me 9 years. And she didn't hesitate for 1 second once a 9-year-old showed up at her door in the dark, saying the word fire. The next 40 minutes are still not fully in order in my memory, and I've stopped trying to force them into one. What I know is this. Doc got us a lift on that medevac strip through a favor that probably shouldn't have worked and did anyway, because sometimes the Army teaches you exactly which favors are worth calling in for the rest of your life. Ray stayed on the phone the entire flight, coordinating with the deputies already rolling toward my street, feeding them everything Mason had told me secondhand through Mrs. Okafor's shaking landline. I sat in that helicopter seat watching my own security app on a phone with 3% battery left, watching the porch camera catch the first flicker of orange, climb up the side of my garage where I keep 40 years of tools and a workshop I built with my own hands. I didn't know it yet, but 3 points of ignition, garage, back mudroom, and the crawlspace vent beneath what used to be my late wife's sewing room meant somebody wanted that fire to move fast and move total. Somebody who'd either done this before, or somebody who'd been coached by a person who had. We landed at a county airfield 18 minutes from my house. A deputy Ray knew personally was already waiting with his engine running. We covered the last stretch in under 6 minutes, and I will never in my life forget coming around that final curve and seeing my own house, the house I raised Denise in, the house Mason had lived in for 3 years, lit up against the night sky, the color of something that shouldn't exist that close to a residential street. Mason was wrapped in a blanket on Mrs. Okafor's porch steps when I got there, and the second he saw me, he came off those steps at a dead run, and I went down on one knee in the grass to catch him because my legs weren't entirely trustworthy right then either. He didn't say anything for a long moment, just held on with both fists twisted into my jacket like he was checking I was actually solid. "You believe me," he said finally, not quite a question. "I called your unit," I told him, because it felt like the truest answer I had. "I believed you before I even finished reading the text." A woman in a windbreaker with a county badge clipped to her belt was crossing the yard toward us, notepad already out. Mr. Hendricks? Detective Naomi Cruz, County Fire and Arson Unit. I need to talk to you, and I need to talk to your grandson, separately, as soon as you're both able. And Mr. Hendricks. She paused, glancing once at the two fire units still working the blaze down to embers behind her. I need to ask you something before we go any further. Has anything changed recently with your homeowner's policy? Any increases? Any new riders? Anyone besides you with access to that paperwork? I didn't know. That had always been the boring column, the folder in the file cabinet I never opened because I trusted the person who'd offered to handle it for me years ago after my wife passed. Back when Denise had said, "Dad, let me take that off your plate. You've got enough going on." And I'd been grateful, actually grateful, the way you're grateful for anyone willing to carry weight for you when you're grieving and tired. I'll have to check, I told Detective Cruz. Check soon, she said, and something in the careful way she said it told me she already had a theory she wasn't ready to say out loud yet. The same way I used to hold back a theory about a device until I'd confirmed it with my own hands instead of my gut. And Mr. Hendricks, I'd hold off reaching out to your daughter just yet. Let us make first contact. I want to tell you, I argued, I didn't. Some part of me, the part that had spent 31 years learning to trust the shape of danger before I could name it, already understood exactly what Detective Cruz was circling. And some colder, quieter part of me, the part that had watched a red gas can on a live security feed from 2 hours away, had already started building the case in my own head before anyone official asked me to. Here's the thing about a daughter you raised right up until the day you didn't anymore. It doesn't announce itself either. Denise had been a good kid, difficult in the ordinary teenage ways, sharper tongued than her mother, prouder than me, but good. Somewhere after her divorce, after Mason came to live with me full time, after the calls got shorter and the visits got rarer, I'd told myself it was grief working on her sideways, the way grief does, and that time would sand it back down into something recognizable. I thought about the sewing room. Fire in the sewing room. My late wife Carol's sewing room, untouched 3 years, still smelling faintly of the lavender sachets she used to keep in the thread drawers. Whoever picked that room as a point of origin either didn't know what it was or knew exactly what it was and wanted it gone specifically. I didn't have an answer yet for which one, and some nights since, I still don't fully. We spent that night in a Hampton Inn off the county highway, Mason in the bed beside mine, Ray and Doc in the room next door because neither one of them would hear of driving back to the cabin that night. Not after what they just helped fly 2 hours across a dark sky to reach. Mason wasn't asleep when I thought he was. I found that out close to 1 a.m., his voice cutting through the dark of the room, small and flat in a way that had nothing childlike left in it. Grandpa? Yeah, bud, you're supposed to be sleeping. Was it my fault? If I hadn't heard her on the phone, if I'd just stayed in my room, none of this would have happened. I sat up so fast the headboard knocked against the wall. Mason, look at me. No, absolutely not. But if I hadn't said anything, if you hadn't said anything, Priya might have been alone in that house with no warning at all when that fire started in 3 places at once. You didn't cause a single thing that happened tonight. You're the reason we're having this conversation instead of a very different one. Do you understand that difference? I guess. I need you to actually understand it, not just say it to make me stop talking. He was quiet a long moment, his face half lit by the parking lot light through the curtain gap. Is Mom going to be in trouble? That one landed harder than I expected, mostly because I hadn't let myself ask it of myself yet. Not directly, not in those exact words. I don't know yet, bud, I told him, honest, because he'd earned honest tonight more than any adult I knew. The police are working on finding out. That's their job right now. Our job is just getting some sleep. You did everything right tonight. Everything. I need you to hear me say that before you close your eyes. Okay, he said, and within a few minutes his breathing evened out the way a 9-year-old's does, once his body finally believes the danger has actually passed. I didn't sleep. I lay there running the same kind of check I used to run on a live device. Go slow. Don't assume anything. Look at what's actually in front of you instead of what you want to be in front of you. Around 3 in the morning, I did something I'm not proud of. I still had the login to the joint email account Denise had set up years ago to help me manage bills after Carol died, back when I trusted her with exactly that kind of thing because she'd asked to help and I'd been too tired and too grateful to think twice about it. I searched homeowner's policy. I found an email dated 7 weeks earlier. Subject line: Coverage update confirmation. Sent from an agent named Grant Fowler. The coverage on my house had jumped substantially, structure and contents both, plus a rider I didn't fully understand the language of, something about named additional beneficiaries in the event of total loss. I read that rider 3 times in a motel bathroom with my grandson asleep 20 feet away, and I felt something in my chest go still, in a way I hadn't felt since my last deployment, a stillness that isn't panic and isn't grief, just clarity arriving somewhere far too late to do any good the first time around, at 6:40 a.m. Detective Cruz called. "Mr. Hendricks, I need you to sit down for this." "I'm sitting." "Your daughter's cell phone ping shows her 31 miles from your house at the time the fire started. Not out of state like she told a neighbor she'd be. 31 miles, at a motor lodge off Route 9, checked in under a name that isn't hers, with a man matching the description of your homeowner's insurance agent." I didn't say anything for a long moment. "Mr. Hendricks? I'm here," I said. "I'm just trying to figure out how long I've been looking at the wrong person and calling her my daughter anyway." Detective Cruz met me and Ray at the county station a little after 8 that morning, while Doc stayed back at the hotel with Mason, having produced from somewhere a deck of cards and a promise of pancakes that seemed to be doing more for a traumatized 9-year-old's nervous system than anything I could have managed myself. Cruz had a folder in front of her, before I even sat down, the kind of folder that tells you the person across the table already knows more than you do and is deciding how much of it to hand you at once. "I want to walk you through what we have," she said, "and then I'm going to ask you to do something you're not going to want to do." She slid the first photograph across. A gas station camera still, time-stamped 55 minutes before the fire, a man in a hooded jacket filling a red container at the pump. "This is Dale Sutter. Small time, mostly break-ins, one prior arson-adjacent charge that never fully stuck. A warehouse fire 2 counties over 11 years back that insurance investigators always suspected but couldn't prove. He's hired muscle. Not the kind of man who plans something like this. The kind of man somebody else pays to execute a plan." Second photograph. A leaner man, younger, working an ID off a partial plate. His partner that night, we're still confirming identity. Third photograph, and this was the one that made the room go quiet around the edges for me. A woman at a diner booth across from a man in a collared shirt, a bank's exterior camera angle catching them through a window. "Recognize her?" I recognized her before Cruz finished the sentence. Denise, sitting across from a man I now knew, from a 7-week-old email in my own inbox, as Grant Fowler, the agent who'd processed my coverage increase. "That's my daughter," I said. "And him?" "Grant Fowler, my insurance agent." "Your insurance agent," Cruz repeated. "Who your daughter has apparently been involved with for approximately 5 months, according to hotel records we've since pulled. The coverage increase happened 7 weeks ago. Their relationship predates that by considerably more." Ray, sitting beside me with his arms crossed, hadn't said a word yet, which for Ray was its own kind of statement. "So this wasn't a spur-of-the-moment thing," he said finally. 5 months of somebody sitting across from you at a barbecue holding your grandson while already building toward this." "We believe it was planned in stages over several months, yes," Cruz said. "The relationship first. The insurance increase second, once trust had been established with Mr. Fowler professionally. The arson last, once the payout structure was fully in place." I made myself ask the next question, even though some part of me already knew the shape of the answer the way you know the shape of a device, before you've fully exposed it. The rider. The one about named beneficiaries in the event of total loss. What does it actually mean? Cruz's expression didn't change, but she chose her next words with the kind of care I recognized from telling families things they couldn't yet fully hear. "It means that in the event of your death, Mr. Hendricks, in a total loss event specifically, Control of a structured payout and a related trust arrangement would transfer to whoever's named as successor guardian for your grandson. The paperwork lists your daughter. They wanted the house gone, I said, and they wanted me gone with it, so she'd get named Mason's guardian free and clear, and control of whatever payout came with all of it. That's our working theory, yes. What about Mason? Was he supposed to? I couldn't finish the sentence. Cruz let the silence sit a moment before she answered it directly, which I respected, because plenty of people would have rushed to fill that silence with something softer than the truth. The origin points suggest whoever set that fire wanted it to look complete, total loss, no survivors. Your grandson's presence in the house that night wasn't a factor they built around avoiding. It was a factor they built around. I've held a lot of things steady in my hands over 31 years that most men never have to hold at all. I've knelt over devices with 60 seconds left on a clock and kept my hands from shaking because shaking hands get people killed. I did not manage to keep my hands steady in that station interview room. Ray put a hand flat on the table beside mine, not touching, just present. The way you do for a man you've watched hold steady through worse and don't want to embarrass by asking if he's all right out loud. The thing you're not going to want to do, Cruz said, once I'd gotten a breath back under me. Your daughter believes, as of this moment, that the fire investigation is ongoing and that you and your grandson are both unaccounted for. We have not confirmed to any outside party that you're both alive and safe. I need that to stay true for a little while longer if we're going to build a case strong enough to hold. I need you to make contact with her, normally, as if nothing is wrong on your end, and let her lead the conversation. You want me to lie to my own daughter. I want you to let her keep believing what she already believes for a few more days, while we build a case that actually convicts the people who tried to kill your grandson, instead of a case that falls apart in court because we move too fast on incomplete evidence. I thought about Mason's voice in the dark of that motel room. Was it my fault? I thought about the word he'd used without knowing it was a legal term. Complete, coming out of his own mother's mouth about a house that had him sleeping inside it. Tell me what to say, I told Cruz. I've followed harder orders than this one before. Denise called that evening. I let it ring twice before I answered, mostly because I needed those 2 rings to remember how to sound like a man who didn't yet know what I knew. Dad, oh my God, are you okay? I just heard. I've been trying your cell all day. Her voice cracked in exactly the right places, and some old, tired part of me that had spent 63 years being her father wanted so badly to believe every syllable of it that I had to grip the edge of the motel dresser to stay upright through the call. We're okay, I told her. Shaken up. Mason's with me. House is a total loss, they're telling me. Oh my God, Dad, I'm so sorry. I'm coming. Where are you? I'll drive up tonight. No need, I said too fast and heard myself say it too fast, and forced my voice back down into something slower. Insurance adjusters got us set up in a hotel already. Some fella named Grant, actually, you'd probably know him from the industry. Seemed real on top of things. I watched for it. I don't know what I expected, some catch in her breath, some pause a half second too long. There wasn't one. She was better at this than I'd given her credit for, and that realization hurt in a way that was almost separate from everything else I was already carrying that week. That's good. That's good you've got someone competent handling it, she said. And I closed my eyes and thought, you already know exactly who Grant is, and you just said his name back to me like you'd never heard it before in your life. Is Mason okay? Can I talk to him? He's asleep, I lied. He was 3 feet away, sitting up in the other bed watching my face with the same careful stillness he'd had staring at a burning house through a car window 2 nights earlier. If this had been that kind of story, except in ours it had been a bedroom window in a dark yard between 2 houses. I'll have him call you tomorrow. Okay. I love you, Dad. I'm glad you're both okay. Love you too, I said. And the words came out of me steady and warm and completely hollow, and I hung up the phone and sat very still on the edge of that motel bed for a long time afterward, turning the phrase over in my head. I'm glad you're both okay. Said by a woman who, 48 hours earlier, had apparently arranged for a house fire built to leave no survivors. Mason was watching me. You're not going to tell her we're not actually asleep. It wasn't a question. 9 years old, and he'd already worked out the shape of the lie without me explaining a word of it. No, bud, not yet. Because the police need her to still think it worked. Something like that. He nodded slowly, absorbing it the way he absorbed everything, filing it somewhere careful behind those quiet eyes. That's smart, he said finally. That's what you'd call, keeping the enemy in the dark about your position. I almost laughed despite everything, because that was almost word for word, something I'd said to him once explaining an old story from the unit, never dreaming I'd be applying the same principle to my own daughter 3 years later. The days that followed moved in a strange, syrupy way, fast and slow at once. Cruz's team built the timeline methodically, while I performed the single hardest role of my career, harder than anything I'd done in uniform, playing a grieving, oblivious father on nightly phone calls to a woman I now understood had tried to have me and my grandson burned alive in our beds. I told Denise the insurance process was slow. I told her we were staying with Doc's family for now. I told her Mason was having nightmares, which wasn't even a lie because he was, most nights, waking sometime around 2 or 3 checking the room for smoke before he could fall back asleep. The break in the case came, of all places, through Grant's own carelessness. Cruz's team had gotten a warrant on his phone, through the fraud angle, separate from the arson charge itself, since it turned out Grant Fowler wasn't his real name at all. A fact that came out 3 days into the investigation and made Cruz's normally composed face do something I hadn't seen it do before, a flicker of genuine surprise. His real name is Grant Halverson, she told me, laying a printout on the table between us. Licensed insurance agent in 2 other states under 2 other identities before this one, both revoked for fraud investigations that never quite made it to trial because the wives involved both backed out of testifying at the last minute. This isn't his first time running exactly this play, Mr. Hendricks. Coverage increase. Romantic relationship with a spouse or family member of the policyholder staged total loss. So my daughter wasn't the one who came up with any of this. We don't believe so, no. We believe she may have been recruited into an established pattern, told a version of it that made her feel like the architect when she was, in our assessment, closer to the 3rd or 4th woman he's run this exact plan through. I sat with that for a long moment, and I want to be honest about what I felt, because it wasn't relief, and it wasn't quite forgiveness either. It was something colder and sadder that I still don't have a perfect name for. My daughter hadn't dreamed up a plan to burn her own child alive from nothing. She'd been shown a well-worn path by a man who'd walked 3 other women down it before her. And somewhere in the space between grief over her own broken marriage and whatever loneliness had made Grant Halverson's attention feel like rescue, she'd said yes to it anyway, with her own eyes open, knowing exactly what house her own son slept in. That doesn't make it better, I told Cruz. No, she agreed. It doesn't. It might matter for sentencing. It doesn't matter for what happened in your driveway 2 nights ago. Buried in the same phone dump, in a text thread between Denise and Grant dated the week before the fire, was a message that Cruz read to me once, flat and professional, and that I have never once managed to fully unhear since. Grant, Dale wants half up front. You good for it? Denise, I'm good for it. I've never been more sure of anything. And the boy, God, I love him, I do, but I can't keep doing this half-life waiting on my father's schedule. New start. Clean. I made Cruz read the second half of that message twice, not because I hadn't heard it clearly the first time, but because some stubborn part of me needed to confirm it, hadn't changed shape between the first hearing and the second, the way you double-check a wire reading before you commit to cutting it. Clean start. 9 years of raising her son myself, 3 years of it full-time, boiled down in her own handwriting to a half-life waiting on my father's schedule, and a boy she loved reduced, in the very next breath, to an obstacle standing between her and something clean. We have enough for arrest warrants on all 3, Cruz told me 2 days later. Grant, Dale, and the second man, we've identified him now, name's Curtis Boyle. Does odd jobs for Dale, no questions asked, minor record. What we don't have yet is your daughter's own voice ordering the hit directly. Everything routes through Grant so far. If we move on what we have now, a decent lawyer gets her a plea on conspiracy and fraud, maybe accessory. The attempted murder charge, the one that actually reflects what she tried to do to a 9-year-old boy. That's harder to make stick without her own words on the record. So what do you need? I need you to get her to say it to you directly, on a call I can legally record, with your consent as the other party on the line, which is all this state requires. I thought about Mason down the hall in Doc's guest room, still checking for smoke every night before he could sleep. I thought about the phrase clean start, written in my own daughter's handwriting about the boy I'd carried around a hospital nursery 9 years earlier while she recovered from delivery, exhausted and 26, and I'd thought at the time, so completely in love with the tiny person she'd just made. Tell me what to say, I said. I've followed harder orders than this one, too. We rehearsed it 3 times in a windowless room at the station, Cruz playing Denise's part with a precision that unsettled me more than I expected, softening her voice into something warmer, something closer to the daughter I remembered from before all of this than I was fully prepared to hear again from anyone. Don't lead with the accusation, she told me. Lead with the exhaustion that's actually true. You're tired. You're scared. You don't want to believe what you already believe. Let her think she's the one comforting you. People who've spent a week convinced they got away with something want to say it out loud to one person eventually. Most of them don't even know that about themselves until the moment shows up in front of them. And if she doesn't say it, if she just didn't say it flat the whole call, then we don't have the confession, and we build the rest of the case slower through Grant's testimony and the financial trail instead. But Mr. Hendricks, she leaned forward slightly, in my experience, people carrying something this heavy for this long, they want the weight gone more than they want to stay careful. Most of them just need someone to hold the door open for a second. We made the call from Cruz's office on a Thursday afternoon, recorder running, Ray sitting beside me with a hand braced flat on the desk, close enough that I could feel it without either of us saying anything about why. Denise picked up on the second ring, her voice already warm, already performing the daughter I used to trust without a second thought. Dad, hey, I was just thinking about you guys. How's Mason doing? Is he sleeping any better? Denise, I said, and let my voice do exactly what it wanted to do, which was crack slightly on her name. Because underneath every rehearsed line Cruz had walked me through, there was real grief clawing up through the surface too, and I didn't fight it down. I need to ask you something, and I need you to just be honest with me. Please, for once. A pause. 3 full seconds, which doesn't sound long until you've lived inside one. Dad, what kind of question is this? Did you know about the fire before it happened? Silence again, longer this time. I could hear her breathing change on the other end of the line. Dad, why would you even? Please, I said, and I let my voice go somewhere. I hadn't let it go since Carol's funeral. I keep thinking about what would have happened if that boy hadn't climbed out his own bedroom window in the dark because he was scared of his own house. I need to know if you knew, because if you didn't, we can find a way through this together, whatever this is. And if you did, I let it hang there, another silence, and then, quieter than I expected, almost tender, almost like the woman who'd once fallen asleep on my shoulder on a long car ride home from her own grandmother's funeral when she was 11 years old. Dad, listen to me. It wasn't supposed to be scary, okay? It was supposed to be fast. You wouldn't have felt anything, neither of you. I made sure of that part. I told Grant, I told him it had to be. She stopped herself, and I heard the breath catch on the other end. The sound of someone realizing half a second too late exactly what she just said out loud into a phone line. Denise. I didn't ask her anything else. I didn't need to. Dad, that's not. I didn't mean. You didn't mean it, I repeated. And something in my chest that had been holding steady for 2 straight weeks finally gave way into something closer to what I actually felt underneath all of it. You didn't mean to have your own son burned alive in his bed. You just meant it to be fast. Cruz was already nodding at me from across the desk. We had it. Every word. Goodbye, Denise, I said, and I ended the call before she could say another single thing to me as a free woman. Guthrie to Tiptook One Cruz's team moved within 4 hours of that call ending. I got the follow-up from her directly. Standing in Doc's kitchen with Mason 2 rooms away, watching cartoons with the particular fierce concentration of a kid trying very hard not to listen to the adults talking. "We got her," Cruz said. "Motel 2 towns over. Grant was with her. 2 packed bags in the room. Receipts show they'd bought bus tickets out of state. For the following morning, cash, no names attached. Looks like they weren't planning to wait around for the payout to clear before they moved. We picked up Dale and Curtis within the same hour, coordinated timing, so nobody had a chance to warn anybody else down the chain." Did she? I didn't know how to finish that question even now. Sitting in my own borrowed kitchen with my grandson's cartoon laughter drifting in from the next room. Cruz waited, patient, the way she'd been patient with every impossible half-question I'd asked her over the past 2 weeks. "She didn't run when they came through the door," Cruz said finally. "Didn't fight it. Sat down on the edge of the bed. First thing she asked the arresting officer was whether Mason was okay. I didn't know what to do with that for a long time, and honestly, some nights I still don't fully. Some small, stubborn, 63-year-old father part of me wanted that question to mean something, wanted it to be proof some piece of the daughter I remembered was still buried somewhere under everything she'd done. People ask that question for a lot of different reasons, Mr. Hendricks," Cruz said, reading something in my silence the way she'd read most things about me correctly over the past 2 weeks. Sometimes it's love that's still real, underneath everything else. Sometimes it's pure self-preservation, wanting to gauge how bad the charges are going to be before she's even finished processing that she's been caught. I've stopped trying to guess which one it is most of the time. It doesn't change what happens next either way. "No," I agreed. "It doesn't." The search of Grant's motel room turned up something Cruz brought to me herself 2 days later, laid flat on the table between us, the same way she'd laid out those first 3 photographs. Except this time her expression had something almost like grim satisfaction underneath the professional calm. A spiral notebook, cheap, the kind you'd buy at any drugstore, pages of Grant's own handwriting in blue ballpoint, numbers and dates running down the left margin like a ledger. Coverage confirmed, 7W case, D handles guardianship filing, target 30 days post, split 60-40, D takes house sale, proceeds separate, Dale 15K up front, 15K after. Boys schedule, home alone, Thursday nights per sitter app. Confirm, WDI made myself read every line of it out loud once, standing right there in the station, because some part of me needed to hear my own voice say the words boys schedule attached to my grandson's Thursday nights in a stranger's handwriting before I could fully believe any of it had actually happened to us, and not to some other family in some other story. "This is the piece that changes everything for the prosecution," Cruz told me. "Everything else we've got is calls, texts, financial records, provable, but it's all secondhand math on a screen. This is a physical document in his own hand, planning the murder of a 9-year-old boy down to which night of the week worked best for his schedule. A jury doesn't forget seeing a page like this held up in front of them. Mason's forensic interview happened that same week, in a soft-lit room built exactly for this purpose, with a specialist trained to ask questions that don't lead a child toward whatever answer the adults in the next room might be hoping for. I watched through a one-way glass with Ray standing beside me, and it remains one of the longest 20 minutes of my life, including several I spent overseas that I'd have told you, before that week, nothing could ever outrank. "Mason, can you tell me what you heard your mom say on the phone that night?" the specialist asked, gentle, unhurried. "She said the house has to look like an accident, and that nobody has to know she was even there." His voice was steady in a way that made my chest hurt to listen to. She wasn't talking loud, but she wasn't really whispering either. Like she wasn't that worried about getting caught. "How did that sound to you?" Her voice, while she said it. Mason thought about that for a long moment, turning the question over carefully the way he does everything. Kind of like when you're reading directions off a recipe, not scared, not even really mean. Just like, next step, next step. Even through the glass, I saw the specialist's pen pause on the page. "That's a really clear way to describe it," she told him. "What did you do after you heard that?" "I texted my grandpa first. Then I climbed out my window because I didn't know if it was safe to go through the front door, and I went to Mrs. Okafor's because her porch light was still on." Were you scared your grandpa wouldn't believe you? A little, but he always believes me. Even when it turns out I was wrong about something small, he still listens first. Do you think you were wrong this time? Mason shook his head, slow and certain, in a way that cracked something loose in my chest all over again. No, he said. This time I was completely right, and I wish I wasn't. Afterward, in the hallway, Cruz found me leaning against the wall, not entirely steady on my feet. He's a remarkable kid, she said. He shouldn't have had to be, I told her. He should have just gotten to be 9. Cruz didn't have an answer for that. Neither did I, not really. We just stood there a moment and let it be true. The 3 weeks that followed moved through the machinery of the case in a way that felt, at times, almost bureaucratic against the size of what had actually happened. Arraignments and discovery motions and a series of phone calls from a district attorney's office walking me through what my own testimony would eventually need to cover. Grant flipped first, taking a plea deal that reduced his sentence in exchange for full cooperation, which told me everything I needed to know about the kind of man he actually was underneath the collared shirts and easy insurance agent charm. His testimony, when it finally came at trial, filled in the last pieces of a picture I'd already mostly assembled myself. Whose idea was the coverage increase? The prosecutor asked him on the stand. Hers. She came to me directly, said she wanted to make sure the family was protected in case anything ever happened to the house. Did you believe that was her actual reason? Grant hesitated, glancing once toward the defense table before he answered. Not for very long, no. By the 3rd or 4th conversation, she was asking specific questions. How fast claims typically get paid out on a total loss? What kind of investigation gets triggered automatically? Whether prior domestic relationships between a policyholder and a beneficiary ever slow anything down on the payout side, and you process the increase anyway. Yes. Why? Another pause, longer this time. Because I'd already run this exact play twice before in 2 other states, and telling myself this one was somehow different was easier than admitting I already knew exactly what I was helping build. Did she ever discuss her father directly with you? Describe him at all? Grant's voice caught for the first time since he'd taken the stand, and for one brief moment he looked, genuinely, like a man confronting the actual shape of what he'd helped construct. She said he was a good man. A war hero, even, is the word she used. Said none of this was really about him, that he'd probably even understand eventually, given everything he'd seen overseas himself. He stopped, and the courtroom stayed quiet a beat too long around him. I remember thinking that was the part that bothered me most, actually. Not that she wanted the money. That she'd convinced herself being a good man somehow made it easier to do this to him, instead of harder. I gripped the edge of the gallery bench hard enough that Ray, sitting beside me, put his hand briefly over mine without a word. Dale and Curtis pleaded to arson and, thanks to that recorded phone call and the notebook found in Grant's motel room, attempted murder as well. Since you don't set 3 simultaneous points of ignition in a house you believe to be occupied, unless total loss with no survivors was always the actual plan, Denise didn't plead. She fought it, hired the best attorney what remained of the frozen assets could still afford, and sat in that courtroom every day in a blazer that made her look, I thought more than once, like a woman interviewing for a job rather than a woman facing decades behind bars. Her attorney tried on cross-examination of me to frame the recorded phone call as manufactured, coerced grief exploited by a detective's script. Mr. Hendricks, he said, pacing in front of the jury box in a way that struck me as almost rehearsed itself. Isn't it true Detective Cruz told you exactly what to say to my client, word for word, before that call was made? She told me what she needed the conversation to establish. She didn't have to teach me how to sound like a father who'd nearly lost his grandson to a house fire 3 weeks earlier. I already was one. But the emotion in that call, the crack in your voice, the phrase "I need to know if you knew," that was performance. Coached, designed to manipulate my client into an admission she wouldn't otherwise have made. I looked at him, not at Denise, and answered slower than I meant to, because I wanted every word of it to land clean in front of that jury. The only performance on that phone call came from the woman on the other end of the line. telling her own father she was glad he and his grandson were safe, 3 days after she'd arranged to have both of us burned alive in our beds. I didn't need coaching to sound like a man whose grandson climbed out a bedroom window in the dark because he was more afraid of staying inside his own house than he was of the dark itself. That part was real the entire time. The defense attorney didn't have a follow-up ready for that. Cruz told me afterward that 2 jurors had visibly reacted, one of them, an older man in the back row, pressing a fist briefly against his mouth. Denise's testimony, when she finally took the stand in her own defense on the second to last day, was the hardest 20 minutes of the entire trial for me to sit through, harder even than my own testimony had been. She cried, at points, in a way that looked genuine, and I've had to make my peace with the fact that I'll never fully know how much of it was. She talked about the divorce, about feeling invisible for years, about Grant making her feel, for the first time in a long time, like someone was actually choosing her instead of just tolerating her. She never once, on the stand, under oath, in front of a room full of strangers deciding the rest of her life, used the word sorry directed at Mason by name. She said his name exactly twice in the entire testimony, both times inside the phrase the boy, as if some part of her still couldn't quite make herself say son out loud in that room, with the notebook sitting in an evidence bag 6 feet away from her. I thought, watching her, about my own younger self, 30 years back, working late shifts and long deployments, while Carol raised Denise mostly alone through most of her childhood, and I thought about a version of fatherhood where I'd been home more, present more, watching more closely for whatever loneliness eventually made a man like Grant Halverson's attention feel like rescue to my own daughter. I don't know if closer watching 30 years ago would have changed a single thing about where we ended up sitting in that courtroom. I know I've had to sit with the question anyway, some nights, longer than I'd like to admit to anyone, including myself. The jury deliberated 7 hours. Conspiracy to commit murder, arson, insurance fraud, financial exploitation of a dependent minor's trust arrangement. The DA's office had built the charges carefully, layering the notebook, the recorded call, Grant's testimony, and Mason's forensic interview into something that left, in the prosecutor's closing words, no meaningful room for reasonable doubt. Sentencing came 3 weeks after the verdict. The judge asked if any victims wished to address the court before he passed sentence, and I stood up before I'd fully finished deciding to. I didn't bring notes. Ray had offered to help me write something out the night before, and I'd told him no because I didn't want it to come out sounding rehearsed. I wanted her to hear it plain, the way I'd have said it to any man across a table who needed to hear exactly what he'd broken. My grandson is 9 years old, I said. He climbed out a second-story window in the dark because some part of him, at 9, already understood something I refused to let myself fully understand about my own daughter until it was almost too late. That the person on the other end of that phone call wasn't who I'd spent his whole life believing she still was. I made myself look at her then. First time since the recorded phone call 3 months earlier. You didn't just try to take my life. I've made my peace with my own life plenty of times over 31 years of service, and I'd have made peace with it again if that's what this had cost. You tried to take his, and in that notebook this court has already seen, the thing that stayed with me hardest isn't the money, or even the plan itself. It's how ordinary the handwriting looked. Boy's schedule, confirm with D, like you were planning a birthday party, instead of a child's death. I don't need this court to understand what that did to him. I need this court to understand that a woman capable of writing that sentence in her own hand doesn't get a lighter sentence because she cried on the stand once after she'd already been caught. The judge asked if I had anything further. I said one more thing. I don't forgive her. I want that on the record, plainly, for whatever it's worth to anyone. Not because I'm bitter for the sake of being bitter. Forgiveness isn't owed to people who never actually ask for it. And she never has, not once, not in that recorded call, not on that stand. She gets exactly what this court decides she gets. Not one thing more from me beyond that. I sat back down. Ray's hand found my shoulder from the row behind me and stayed there. Across the courtroom, Denise didn't look at me. She'd stopped looking at me somewhere around the 4th week of trial. I'd noticed The way a person stops looking for something in a face. Once they've finally understood, there's nothing left there that's going to help their case. The judge handed down 38 years for Denise. No possibility of parole before Mason would be well into his own middle age. Grant, given his cooperation and his prior pattern across 2 other states finally being fully documented for the first time in his life, received 29. Dale and Curtis, 22 and 18 respectively, the notebook having made the attempted murder charges against them essentially impossible for any defense to argue away. I felt something when they read Denise's sentence, but it wasn't the triumph I might have expected, sitting there. I felt the way you feel setting down something you've been carrying too long, without realizing quite how heavy it had gotten, the strange, disorienting lightness of your arms, remembering how to hang normally at your sides after weeks of holding something braced against your chest. Ray found me on the courthouse steps afterward, staring out at nothing in particular. You all right? I don't know what I am exactly. That's allowed, Walt. 38 years isn't a party. It's just the scale finally settling back where it should have been the whole time. I keep waiting for it to feel finished. It's not going to feel finished for a good while yet. Maybe not ever, not all the way. Doesn't mean you can't start actually living again in the meantime. Those aren't the same thing. And I don't want you sitting around waiting for the wrong one before you let yourself have the second one. When'd you get so wise, Delgado? I've always been this wise. You were just usually too busy being the ranking NCO in the room to notice. He bumped his shoulder against mine, the same gesture he'd been giving me since basic training, 40 years running now. Go pick that boy up from school. Don't tell him the verdict in the car. Tell him at home, sitting down, where he can ask you every question he's got in him. He's earned that much. I picked Mason up from school that afternoon and didn't say a word about the courthouse until we were home, sitting across from each other at the kitchen table, the way Ray had told me to. He listened to the whole thing without once interrupting, which wasn't entirely like him, and when I finished he sat quiet for a long moment, working something over behind those careful eyes of his. 38 years, he said finally. That's basically forever. Basically, I agreed. Good, he said, and pushed back from the table to go find a snack, and that for him that day was that. No tears, no big scene, just a 9-year-old boy deciding, out loud and without apology, that some things had simply earned the right to be over. We're in a new house now, Mason and I, smaller than the old one, on a street with better streetlights and neighbors who wave instead of just nodding on their way past. Ray's 4 minutes away, which is close enough to matter, and far enough that I still have to prove to myself most days that I can carry this on my own. I've got a new fireproof lockbox bolted into the closet of my workshop, and yes, I built the workshop myself, and yes, I checked every wire in that house twice before either of us slept a single night in it, because some habits you don't get to fully retire. And I've stopped minding that about myself. Mason's 10 now, still quiet, still watchful, though the checking for smoke habit finally eased off somewhere around the 2nd year, and the hallway light gets switched off most nights without a fight. He doesn't ask about his mother often anymore, and when he does, I give him the truth. Size down for whatever age he happens to be that year, the way you're supposed to. He knows she's in prison. He knows the broad shape of why, even if I've spared him most of the specific details for now. He knows I never once, not for a single second since that text lit up my phone at a lake cabin 2 hours from home, doubted a single word he told me. A few months back, over dinner, he asked me something that caught me flat-footed in a way not much manages to anymore. Grandpa, do you think it's weird that I notice stuff other people don't? No, I told him. I think that's the exact reason we're both still sitting at this table right now instead of not sitting anywhere at all. I think whatever that thing is in you that catches what other people walk right past, I hope you never let anybody talk you out of trusting it. Not me, not a teacher, not anybody. I owe that thing everything I've still got left. I owed him something else, too. Something I hadn't said out loud until that same dinner. And Mason, I need to tell you something. There were things about your mom I saw for years and didn't want to look at closely because it was easier not to. I should have asked harder questions a long time before that night ever happened. That's on me, not on you, and I'm sorry it took something this big to make me finally look. He thought about that for a while, the way he thinks about everything, and then he did something that undid me more than the whole trial had managed to. He reached across the table and put his hand over mine, the way I'd done for him in a motel room 3 months earlier. "You looked as soon as I told you," he said. "That's what matters. You didn't need it to be big first." I had to get up and check something in the other room for a minute after that. He grinned at me later that same night, the real grin, the one that still looks exactly like it did when he was 5 years old, sitting on my shoulders at a 4th of July parade. "Can we get a dog? Where's this coming from?" Dogs notice things, too. We'd be a good team. That's not exactly a no. It's not a yes either. Ray said you always cave eventually. Ray needs to mind his own business. He laughed, loud and unguarded, the sound bouncing clean off the walls of a kitchen that has never once, not for a single night since we moved in, made either one of us afraid to fall asleep inside it. I made a mental note right then to call the shelter that weekend. Some promises you make silently to yourself instead of out loud, because you already know you're going to keep them regardless. Some nights after he's finally down, I sit alone in that kitchen and think about how close I came, 2 hours away at a lake cabin, to setting my phone face down on a picnic table and letting it sit there until morning the way I usually did on those trips. I think about Cruz's voice on the phone telling me the coverage writer had my grandson's guardianship attached to my own death. I think about a notebook entry in blue ballpoint ink, boy's schedule confirm with D, and my own daughter's voice on a recorded call, warm and almost tender, telling her best accomplice that her own son wouldn't feel a thing. And then I think about 6 words lit up on a phone screen at a picnic table, 2 hours from home, small and certain and utterly unwilling to be talked out of what a 9-year-old already knew to be true. "Don't come home, Grandpa. Please. Something's wrong. We didn't, and because we didn't, we're both still here, and she isn't, not anywhere that matters to either one of us anymore. Not in this house, not in this life, not for one single day either of us has left to live in it. I don't forgive her." I want to be clear about that, in case anyone listening is waiting for the part where I find some grace, some line about how holding on to this only hurts me in the end. Maybe that's true for other men, other stories. It isn't true for mine. Some things don't earn forgiveness just by the passage of time. Some things only ever earn consequences, delivered in full, and then a door closed behind them for good. You clear a room before you trust it's empty. I spent 31 years teaching other men that lesson with a live device sitting between us and the door. I never once expected I'd need to teach it to myself about my own daughter, in my own kitchen, at 63 years old. I did anyway, and I'm still standing here to tell you about it.